the overarching pattern over time is one of a dawning of a kind of moral enlightenment. It's not, as you point out, it does not prevent the alternatives from repeatedly reemerging, right? But I mean, let's take, for example...
But how can we even call it enlightenment? Why is it not just our preference?
Let's take the story of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the story of Jesus, if I understand it, and I'm no biblical scholar, but if I understand that story, the key elements of it, or at least several key elements of it, involve a broadening of the sense of self, right? A broadening of the in-group. This is what the story of the Good Samaritan tells us, right? This is what the golden rule is. This is, love your enemy. Now, those things are a radical increase in the inclusion of others into an in-group. And the benefits of stabilizing a larger in-group are absolutely tremendous. Now, imagine for a moment that Jesus had said these things in game theoretic terms, and he had tried to convince people with whatever the equivalent of a whiteboard would have been of, the reasons to broaden the in-group at this moment in history. It's preposterous, right? It's not a good argument. Even if it's a true argument, nobody's going to get it. Nobody's going to care, right? So that's not how humans become enlightened. Humans become enlightened because of the power of a narrative that causes them to modify their behavior so that they do function more effectively in light of all of the game theoretic hazards that are always jeopardizing us. Which then answers your other question, I think. Why do the bad patterns, if it's simply good to include others in your in-group, why don't we just simply evolve to default to that and never waver? And the problem is that there's a competition between short-term gain and long-term gain. Effectively, the upgrade in which you in-group more people is much better in the long run. But in the short run, individuals who decide to take advantage of that may have some advantage inside of the group, right? And so building a structure in which you can't get away with it increases the effectiveness of the moral point, right? If you have everybody calculating that it's morally, you should do the morally right thing if you are in a position to be observed, and if you're not in a position to be observed, then you should do whatever is most profitable, right? Civilization breaks down. If, on the other hand, you take a narrative and you say, nobody ever gets away with anything, it's being observed, it's being recorded, and it may be profitable in the short run, but there's an awful lot of punishment that will come later, right? Frankly, I don't even know if the sentence I just said is a religious narrative or a translation of game theory. It's the same thing.
Right, and I would say that everything you're saying, which is complex, quite, is an argument for a creator, because the design is so brilliant as you're describing it, and the end result, of course, is like the perpetuation of the species, of all species, that that's an accident, because you're describing a system with intent, and that intent comes from where? You're describing a system with a goal.
I am describing a system with a goal, not with intent. Yeah, the system has a goal, and
the goal is the intent, right? The intent is to achieve the goal.
Well, that is the sticking point. That
this doesn't make any sense.
No, it makes a lot of it doesn't
make any sense without it. Well, I don't want to use the phrase intelligent design, but
let's take a parallel example, and
okay,
we could trip over the parallel example if
I just think you've made an amazing case for God, and I didn't know if you thought of yourself as an evangelist. But
no,
you just convinced me.
I've made a very compelling case for a belief in God.
So it's not every day that the Catholic Church gets a brand new leader, a new pope. Christians around the world are watching really, really carefully. This is the largest Christian denomination, the oldest church. It is essential that the Catholic Church gets a wise new leader who is installed not simply by the cardinals, but by God. And so it's your job to pray for that. There is no better way to pray for that than with Hallow. Hallow is the world's #1 prayer app. It is the subject of nightly conversation at my dinner table. And Hallow just launched its Conclave Prayer Challenge that allows you to pray for the Holy Spirit to move within the cardinals and to choose the right pope. It matters whether you're Catholic or not. This multi-episode series walks you through the Vatican's process. It provides updates as news breaks, and it offers prayer guidance at every turn. Again, even if you're not Catholic, which, by the way, I'm not, it is worth praying for a good and Christian pope. The day after the decision, Hallow launches a 7-day Pray for the Pope challenge, followed by another papal saint name challenge to go deep into the life of the saint the Pope chooses for his name. This will be immersive, totally immersive, like everything they do. So you can download the Hallow app today to dive in. It will honestly change your life. Well, but what's the other explanation?
Well, that's just the thing. Is the other explanation is that there are processes that function. Let's take 2 examples, okay? If we talk about the behavior of a seedling, right? The seed is planted, it breaks open, it germinates, and the seedling rises against gravity and breaks the surface, and it puts out its 2 little solar panels. And at that point, it bends towards the sun. You could say, what is the other explanation for that other than a desire to reach the sunlight? And the answer is actually, in this case, we know the mechanism, and it's amazing.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But it's not desire.
But it expresses a value, though. And the value is life is better than death.
It expresses...
To exist is better than not to.
Yes, it expresses an objective, but not a desire.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's a semantic question. I don't know. I see a huge difference between the two, but
that's exactly my point. Is what I'm not trying to compel people that the answer that I think I can see is right for them. I'm trying to convince people that the answer I think I see is actually not dogged by some paradox that makes it unviable. It's too cumbersome to live by it. But it's, just like the example of the baseball game. The baseball game happens, it's made of atoms and energy. And you could imagine commentators sitting there describing the energy and the material in, the object. And it would be the worst, most cumbersome commentary at a sports event conceivable.
But it wouldn't really tell you anything useful.
Right. That's the point.
Right. So what I see by your description is an entire universe screaming at the top of its collective lungs, life is better than death.
No, only the living stuff thinks that.
Well, I mean, I'm not exactly sure we can measure or define living as precisely as we think we can. But whatever. I mean,
yeah. Look,
but in general, observe living things that we describe as living that we can observe are all moving in the same direction. And the message, being a message guy, I can discern this. Life is better than death.
Yeah, I agree. Another example. Okay, let us agree that love is a profoundly, I'm struggling for words even good enough to describe it, is a profoundly transformative property of life that is as close to a North Star as a human being can have. And I don't mean just romantic love, familial love, love of country, all of these things. Love is this tremendously powerful force. Now let us say there's actually a lot of neurochemistry that we can describe relative to love. which story do I want people living by? Oh, definitely the narrative one in which you just simply surrender to the power of this thing and you allow it to be a guide. That's definitely, I don't want to live amongst people who view love as just a bunch of chemical reactions, yada, 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 right? That's a horrifying dystopia. But it doesn't make it untrue that love is mediated through neurochemistry.
Yeah, why can't both be true? That doesn't.
They are. That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point.
Right.
They are both true.
But only one describes the purpose of it, the origin of it.
Only one is useful for a living.
No, but I'm saying the theist believes he understands why this is happening.
Right.
The atheist has no idea.
Well, in a sense.
So really, that's the question. It's not a question of how things happen. It's a question of why they happen.
Well, I'm trying to talk to two camps in a sense,
right.
And maybe this will be more of a theme of our discussion on other topics here, but there's a kind of nuance that has become impossible. And I'm trying to make a point to the atheists about what they've failed at and why they're not reaching lots of people and why they're losing ground. And I'm also trying to make a point to the theological folks about Darwinism and about the utility of figuring out how to reconcile these things rather than view them as competing explanations.
There's not another person I know who I could have a conversation on this topic about in the way that we're doing. And I just want to say, I think you're one of the most open-minded in a good way people I've ever met.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.